Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first webinar of Fectfinder. My name is Marcel Boera, and I'm the managing partner within Fectfinder. Very excited. Today, we're going to give you a demonstration on how to prevent and detect financial economic crime using our new developed modular system. We're going to explore the combination of AI, technology, and rule-based as the future of financial economic crime prevention. For this webinar, we're using live stream and within YouTube and Livestorm. For both, we have set up the possibility to chat and answer all your questions during the demo or soon after. And at the end, we'll be providing our contact details when necessary. So let us look at the agenda of today. In the next hour, we'll be covering the following topics. First, we'll start off with an introduction of the speakers of this webinar and our roles within Fectfinder. Continue with highlighting the scale and impact of financial economic criminality. Then we'll proceed with explaining how Fectfinder bridges the gap in one continuous improvement process. And finally, we're going to give you a live product demonstration of Fectfinder. So let us look at the speakers of today. Robin Bakker, Ruud Smit, and myself are going to guide you through this webinar. We will give a short introduction so you know who we are and the experience we have with FEC and our role within Fectfinder. So I'll start up with myself, Marcel Boera. As I told you, managing partner within Fectfinder. I've been working for tier banks in the Netherlands, very familiar with daily operations, compliance activities of these banks. Passionate about designing intuitive workflows that help people focus better on their daily activities.
Hi everyone, my name is Robin Bakker and I'm the CTO of Fectfinder. I'm overall responsible for the design of the application. For the last decade, I've been involved in software development to detect and prevent fraud. More recently, I was the analytics lead for KYC in a tier 1 bank in the Netherlands. So I'm very familiar with transaction monitoring.
Hello everyone, also from my side. My name is Ruud Smit and I have a global background in interdisciplinary scientific research and data analytics. And I'm very passionate about helping organizations and businesses gain novel insights into their data and to contribute to global challenges using data-driven approaches. I'll see you later for the live demonstration of Fectfinder.
So let us look at the background of FEC and some key figures. FEC is often associated with no real victim or cause, but sadly this is a perception and far from the truth. For example, human trafficking, forced prostitution, victims of the drug wars, child labor, the human cause of financial criminality is very real and it's a global phenomenon. Financial crime is a trillion-dollar industry that takes an enormous social impact toll on lives of it touches. Every year, an estimated of 2.4 trillion proceeds from activities described earlier that is being laundered through the world's financial markets and banking systems. Based on a survey in 2017 across major financial centers, we see an 11% annual growth in volumes of suspicious reported. As we have seen within organizations, an estimate of 40.3 million people in 2016 were victims of modern slavery, including forced labor and child labor, while the numbers are still increasing. Currently, only a very small amount of FEC activity is detected in the global financial system. As we see in the slide, it's less than 1%. That's an estimate of criminal funds flowing through these systems every year are frozen or confiscated by law enforcement. Banks, financial services companies, and public institutions are the vanguard of fighting this crime. But with the rise of crime tech, they need sophisticated tools to monitor and track criminals and the transactions they undertake, and that's where Fectfinder comes in. So if we go to the next slide, which says something about the Fectfinder mission. We've created Fectfinder with a global goal to contribute to the fight against FEC. We have aligned our goal to the Sustainable Development Goals promoted by the United Nations, which serve as a blueprint to achieve a better future for all. In particularly, SDG number 16 aims at promoting peaceful, inclusive societies and accountable institutions, which includes to end corruptions and all form of violence related to financial economic crime, as well as to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. With Fectfinder, we aim to provide tech solutions that helps institutions to do exactly that, to become effective and compliant in the fight against financial economic crime.
Thank you, Marcel. So, one way to detect financial economic crime is through transaction monitoring. And luckily, there's a guidance to do that that's been created by the Dutch regulator, the DNB. So, let me walk you through that whole process. And actually, it all starts with the customer due diligence, and that is the process of basically answering the question whether you want to onboard a customer or not. But to do that, you need information, and that can be either through available transactions or information at the financial investigations unit. Well, if you decide to onboard a customer and that person or company looks legit, then obviously at some point that customer will generate transactions. And as a financial institutions, you need to do transaction monitoring. If you are of a certain scale and you have a certain number of customers and transactions, then obviously you can't monitor them all. So you need to make some choices. And what the guidance tells you is you need to start with a risk assessment, or in Holland it's actually the SIRA, and that is to understand what kinds of risks you are exposed to as a financial institution or organization. And once you are aware of those risks, you're actually able to determine specific business rules. And these business rules are actually filters to select or pick out the transactions of your interest, because obviously the majority is really not interesting at all. So examples of business rules can be cash deposits exceeding a certain amount, or transactions to high risk jurisdictions. That's just some examples. So once you've concluded those business rules, you can actually target or more specifically filter transactions of your interest. The transactions that were picked up by your filter, they need your attention. And therefore you need an investigations team that actually look at all those individual customers and transactions that were alerted. And there's the first line, handling a review, and there's the second line. That's basically escalations from the first level, and eventually that actually may lead to an escalation to the FIU again. So this is quite a straightforward process. However, to keep it up to date and specific and continuously improve, you need to have a data-driven learning and improvement cycle. And that can be quite tricky, especially if you have scattered processes and silos, systems and data. So lack of integration can make this quite difficult and time-consuming. However, it's very necessary in order to become both effective and efficient in transaction monitoring. To make it even more easy, they actually, you have to come up with a governance as well to stay safe and make sure um, you're doing the right monitoring all the time. So obviously it's a good, well, a guidance, but to actually implement it and well, ensuring that you are effective in transaction monitoring is a huge challenge. And the challenge is that, well, we as a company are aware of and seen within tier one banks or of different nature. So first of all, you can do obviously automation, but it's still very resource intensive. And there's also the problem of scarce resources. And these KYC resources are becoming more and more scarce every day as financial institutions are challenged more and more every day by regulators. So specifically, rule-based systems are notorious for producing many alerts, and of which many are also false positives. Well, there might be false positives, but still they need your attention. The other problem is working in silos. As I mentioned before, there's lack of sometimes collaboration or information sharing. So the nature of FEC. As Marcel just showed you on the previous slide, quite often FEC is undetected, and obviously we don't even know how much we're missing. So although we have some information and experience on FEC, there's still a lot we don't know. The problem that all financial institutions face is obviously that being part of a large financial international network, you only see just a small fraction. So FEC quite often is cross-institution, cross-border, and even cross-continent. And a smart criminal obviously change strategy. So they can do one scheme at moment X and moment Y do something completely different because obviously they are aware of, well, what the efforts FIs put in every day to detect them. So they're very aware of that and therefore changing strategies, coming up with new schemes. So what you're facing in the end is looking for a needle in a haystack, especially a tier one bank with billions of transactions. How are you going to pick the right one? That's a really difficult challenge. So obviously becoming effective is one thing. You need to be compliant as well. And there's this continuous stress of audit. And as the TM process, well, depending on how scattered it is and how large of an operation it is, sometimes it's really difficult to collect all the evidence across the systems and departments. So collecting evidence it can be a big task on itself, and really you don't want any distraction in this already big challenge. So yeah. The fragmented process, yeah. So because it's a pretty long end-to-end chain with quite often a lot of systems and experts, that brings a lot of complications. And so often what you see if you want to, I don't know, implement new technology, for instance, or change some rules, you have a long implementation time. Also, you got the resources within IT need to be available, so it can be quite time consuming. And by the time you have implemented a new technology or rule, well, then it's already outdated. If you have a fragmented process in silos, then you obviously risk the learnings or sharing learnings, and in order to improve the complete process. That is also what happens quite often. You can have a rule-based system with case management, but obviously all those labels coming out of case management, when you use them for AI, that quite often is a very difficult task. And as a KYC lead, you want to have an end-to-end overview of your whole process. That's the only way to actually steer and optimize the whole operation. So that should be available. Quite often it's very time consuming to collect information and data to actually get a proper helicopter view of your entire process. And as mentioned before, siloed systems and data, whether it's expert working in silos, it is well, you're obviously not leveraging uh, all the expertise and the learnings, which is, well, it's a missed opportunity, obviously. And nowadays, well, more and more data, that's an opportunity, but especially some of the older systems have some difficulty to ingesting and processing all the data. So it's not really an opportunity, but it's more of a burden. So being able to process high volumes of data obviously is very necessary in this time and age. Besides that, depending on your rules, you can have many tunable parameters. Yeah, you need to consider as well. So these are just some of the main challenges that we are familiar with throughout institutions, financial institutions. So with that process in mind, the guidance from the DNB and the challenges, we developed Fectfinder. And Fectfinder is actually, well, let's say a whole set of modules that in combination will support the whole end-to-end process and ensures your compliance as well. So if you look at the modules that Fectfinder is made of, on the left side, it actually is a lot about the user interface. And if you look at the, well, let's say the blue on the left, so the MI, risk dashboard, case handling, audit trail, they are all dashboards and information available for the KYC specialist in the organization. At the center, there's a data and a file storage. There's a separate rules engine and AI, and I will explain those modules more in the next couple of slides. But what's also important is that you can integrate internal, external data. So whether it's CDD data or maybe you have some other specific data you want to use for your case investigations or your AI, it can be integrated within the system, as well as local AI and rules. So a lot of companies, institutions, they have a lot of initiatives on AI, and quite often they work around in isolation. They don't have a proper case handling. This is where also Fectfinder can be used to integrate those local initiatives to make sure that everything is integrated. And therefore, we have developed a very nice API. So pretty much you can, well, depending on your needs and the maturity of the organization, you can pick any module and combine that and just, so you can actually see Fectfinder as the cement for your, to basically make your whole end-to-end TM process seamless. So a different perspective is a look at the layers. So obviously it's about the financial crime fighters doing their everyday jobs, to keep the institution safe. And for that they need information, whether it's management information to keep track of the whole operation, it's the audit trail to see who changed what when, the risk dashboard to do your continuous risk assessment or case handling. And all of those modules are connected through Fectfinder's backend or to your local AI or rule systems via its API. So it's all about integration and making your transaction monitoring process as easy as can be, which is obviously very necessary. So looking at the FEC or the financial crime fighters, if you look at the especially tier 1 banks, but also other financial institutions, there's a head of KYC. I primarily interested in MI and understanding what's the overall status of the operations, how does it go with new implementations or backlogs and those kinds of MI stuff. We got the MLRO or the money laundering reporting officer. Obviously that person is a very key role in the whole TM process and is responsible to keep the institution safe. For the case handling, we got the lead investigator and the case investigator. So they're responsible to deep dive into the alerts and the customers associated with an alert and the transactions in order to determine whether it is actually suspicious or not. Then another role is becoming more and more important is the analytics expert. So developing models or applications to detect criminal behavior. And last but not least is the financial economic crime risk expert. And those are, generally speaking, the individuals that understand money laundering or terrorist financing, understand the scenarios or the risk topologies associated with those risks, and also know how to translate those scenarios into rules within the system. So these functions or roles are very essential to actually become effective at transaction monitoring. And they obviously need to be engaged in the same continuous cycle of improvement. And that's also where Fectfinder helps out. So for all of these individuals, there's a module in the system that they can use, and they're all integrated. So in the end, it's about connecting all these experts in the continuous cycle of improvement to reduce false positives and mitigate false negatives. Now let's have a look at the existing transaction monitoring systems on the market. So this quadrant has a y-axis, and on one hand you have rule-based, and on the other hand you have black box AI. On the x-axis we have the acceptance appetite of the regulator. And quite often you will see that technology that is explainable, which by default rule-based is, has a higher acceptance appetite from the regulator. And black box AI, although might prove to be more effective and efficient, has, generally speaking, you can have more debates with your regulator. So if you look at the current offerings out there on the market and you see the vendors with rule-based systems, those systems are, they've been around for a longer period. They are fully matured, meaning they got proper case management, they got MI capabilities, and they tend to move a bit towards the AI spectrum. And if you look at new vendors, they're more focused on AI as a solution, and quite often they're less mature. But I think the problem here is that they are still separate environments, separate systems, and there's no integration. And what you will see happening is that as a financial institution, you still have to buy both, because obviously you want to have both because they're complementary. But if you don't integrate them, you don't have any benefits, or not enough, in my opinion. So that's basically the problem we try to solve with Fectfinder, is to basically bridge the gap between those two different spaces. So if you look at traditional rule-based, call it traditional, it's still being used quite often, and it still can be very effective. So rule-based is surrounding predefined rules or filter SQL statements, perhaps, and data ingested into a system, and your alerts come out. They're being investigated by the investigations team. And completely separated from that, there's the AI approach, which actually uses answers or labels, for instance, customers being suspicious and customers being not suspicious, and data, feed it into a system, and get your rules. So this is a very important paradigm shift in its, but the thing is, quite often they're completely, again, not connected. And this is also where Fectfinder comes in. So we try to remove the boundaries between both approaches. And within the system, you will use your case investigations and your outcomes to, via AI, improve your rules. So talking about a continuous improvement cycle, well, this is it. So, and because they're all in the same system, you can actually leverage the AI, improve rules, and also being able to articulate and explain to your regulator to ensure that they accept the technology and the rules you're using. So how does that work? So this is actually the process within Fectfinder. If you see on the right bottom, you see your case handling, rules engine, and AI. So this process is about how those three modules are combined within Fectfinder. So as you saw in the slide from the local regulator, the DMB, you should start with your risk assessment. So it's for you to understand, out of all the risks out there, which ones am I exposed to? That's the first step. The second step is when you've defined your specific risks, you need to understand, so if that risk would occur, what would it look like? If it's, for instance, money laundering associated with, just to give an example, high cash deposits, then you need to figure out the scenario. So that's basically how it would occur or how it would happen within your bank. Translate that scenario into business rules is the next step, number 3. So, for instance, okay, interested in cash deposits, maybe I want to look for smurfing, determining a frequency or a certain amount, a threshold, and implement it in the system. What's also really neat about Fectfinder is that you can actually validate your business rule before you implement. And that's quite important because that ensures that you don't have any rules in your system that either produce, well, very few or a lot of alerts. So, and the problem is once you have put a rule in production, you need to maintain it and you need to investigate. So having a validation step in between design and putting into production is a very, very important step. So within Fectfinder, you can actually see, for instance, if the hypothesis that you have and the rules that are associated, you can actually validate whether it happens, or maybe it's very normal behavior, right? And then you can reiterate. But the validation step is a very, very important step. Now, if you validate it and you are satisfied with what you see, you can actually start to operationalize those rules and start alerting customers. And then what happens is that, well, you get your cases. So you need to investigate specific customers being alerted, and that's the case handling module number 5. Based on that outcome, that assessment of the customer, and basically what it comes down to is adding labels, be it suspicious or not, you can start using supervised machine learning, or the AI module, and that will actually help you in enhancing those business rules. So we will show that later in the demo, but the AI will help you to better target suspicious customers by prescribing to you how to modify or alter the business rule to become more effective and to reduce both false positives and also false negatives. And what you need to do is continuously monitor the performance of those rules and to see whether they need enhancement or not. Or maybe you want to switch them off at some time or do whatever kind of modification. And use those monitoring process to also as input for your risk assessment again. So this is the continuous cycle from performing the SIRA, data-driven, to implementation, to investigations, to supervised learning, all within one system. And that's what's really powerful about Fectfinder and what sets it apart, that it's all integrated fully. So, besides the supervised machine learning, there's also unsupervised machine learning capabilities in the system. And that's basically there to help you find unknown unknowns. So obviously you might have some ideas and hypotheses how money laundering would look like. Having enhancement that can potentially pick up behavior that you didn't think of before and analyze it, or having it presented to the investigations team might be really beneficial. And so based on some of the recent technologies, we added some to our AI module, like for instance network analysis, that's based on graph theory. And that can be very powerful in detecting unusual networks. For instance, related to a risk typology as hidden relationships or many-to-one, one-to-many, and so on. So it's a really good enhancement to have in the system, and that is part of the AI module. The other one is pattern recognition that can actually look at, well, it does look at the payment string and can find hidden messages or, I don't know, weird recurring invoice numbers or invoice descriptions in relationship with an amount that's unusual. So pattern recognition is the other very powerful algorithm. And the last one is anomaly detection. So there's a couple of different algorithms that either good at detecting local or global outliers, and local is associated to something that stands out within the context of a customer, and global is, well, this customer, I don't know, has huge ridiculous amount transactions, or maybe lack of transactions could be as well. So those are available in the system. And again, I can't emphasize enough, if you got local AI initiatives that have proven to you to be very effective, then we integrate it in the Fectfinder system. So I already mentioned the supervised machine learning, those decision trees building on top of existing business rules and enhance them for you to become more effective at basically identifying real suspicious behavior. So looking at the right corner again, this is all about the user interface. So obviously technology is important, but in the end, when it comes to case investigations or the whole operation, it's about experts working together closely in a fully integrated environment in a seamless end-to-end process. So looking from the audit trail to MI, risk dashboard, and case handling, there is a interactive dashboard designer for your specific needs. So for instance, as a case investigator doing case handling, I want to see, for instance, some of the context of the customer. Obviously an alert, to assess an alert properly, you need information. What's the international footprint? Does this individual have a lot of transactions with some specific country or counterparty? So being able to customize that for your specific needs and your business type is really helpful. And there's a lot of really nice visualizations in the system that you can use to reduce investigations time, but also to make a better judgment call, which is very important. The risk dashboard is about continuously monitoring. So looking from the case outcome, the case investigations. So, well, you got your idea on what kind of risk you're exposed to, but what's actually happening in your daily operation. So this is really useful to have continuously updated and available for you because then you can identify potential gaps you need to mitigate throughout different controls, or maybe perhaps come up with new rules to mitigate those risk gaps. The MI, as mentioned before, primarily for the KYC lead to get a helicopter view of the complete operation, whether it's from rules being in production, risks that you're exposed to, or backlogs potentially, maybe you need to scale up on resources. So having all the MI in there for the KYC leaders, I think it's very, very powerful as well, and very necessary to become effective at fact detection. And obviously then there's the audit trail. So all evidence, all the changes, modifications in the systems are stored within the Fectfinder module. So it's just a push of the button, and it really makes audits much, much easier. So data visualization is very important, and choosing the right visuals to make better decisions is what it's all about. So this is a very, very, we invested a lot in these dashboards, making sure that it's that they're user friendly and they're really helping you in your day-to-day job. So next part is actually the demo. So my colleague Ruth will walk you through some of the really nice features of the system, and I will talk to you a bit.
Thank you very much, Robin. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes on giving you a live demonstration of Fectfinder from its menu and setup to the different management dashboards that were designed for specific roles, to demonstrating you the powerful combination of business rules and AI. So let's start with the home dashboard that you're currently seeing. Right now I'm logged in as a super user, so I have access to all functionality and dashboards of the tool, which are meant to be customizable. So what you're seeing right here are placeholder graphs that can be adjusted to every user's specific needs. So for example, number of active cases per effect type or number of cases resolved over a certain period of time. So let's continue with the menu structure. As previously introduced, the continuous improvement process was meant as a basis to build the menu structure of the tool. Starting with the risk assessment menu, which includes an interactive dashboard that I'm going to show you in a minute, and the option to create a FX scenario via the new scenario button here, or to edit an existing FX scenario. Here, for example, we have a FX scenario related to money laundering, where one can add a name or description and link it to a certain fact type. As a next step, the menu contains the option of a business rule validation. So here I'd be able to, again, create a new business rule that I can link to a previously defined created fact scenario, or I can edit an existing business rule. For example, here I have a business rule where I can, for example, add specific labels or turn on or off a button related to a politically exposed customer. I can add specific segments for filtering or grouping transaction types, industry, and high-risk countries, and so on. If I then wanted to promote the business rule after validation into the next step to transaction monitoring, I can do it here via the promote button. Let's have a look at the dashboard. So this dashboard is a dashboard to give a general overview of a risk assessment. So for example, as a risk manager, I might be interested in exploring the likelihood or the impact of a certain risk scenario and its associated risk level. I might also be interested in exploring high-risk countries by hovering over, for example, of this global map that indicates a risk level associated with a specific country. So using this dashboard, a risk manager would get an overview of the overall effectiveness of a business rule and their associated risks. Next, we have the transaction monitoring menu, which includes another dashboard that is aimed at, for example, an investigations lead to get an overall idea about active business rules. For example, by hovering over here over a certain time period again, or transaction related to a specific country, for example, or transactions related to a specific fact type. The confusion matrix here can also be used as a classification method to validate potentially fraudulent activities. Then the next step in the menu allows for a business rule monitoring, in which a business rule can either be promoted into production after viewing and monitoring, by executing the business rule. Or it can be demoted after negative evaluation. One of the highlights of Fectfinder is really the business rule enhancement option in the next step of the menu, which allows for AI-supported improvement of business rules. So in this example, we have the option to explore a decision tree related to a specific business rule and its associated fact scenario and risk. So when clicking on this icon, I can interactively explore the different branches of the decision tree by investigating its false positives and true positives that are here indicated in red and in purple. So by expanding, for example, these branches of the tree related to a business rule that indicates cash transaction above 12K, I can explore how adding features like, for example, point of sales transaction can improve my business rule by looking at the true positives rate and how it increases by adding it. Same for the amount of cash, for example, of above 24K. You can look at the percentage of false and true positives and how by adding it to my existing business rule, it can improve the effectiveness. So following the continuous improvement process, let's have a look at the next menu option on case handling. The case handling dashboard here can be used by an investigations lead, for example, to get an overview of cases resolved a day and the time, in this case here, the number of resolution norm it took to resolve specific cases. Can be also explored by employee or per day and so on. The next option in the menu allows then for the assignment of specific cases by clicking the Assign to Me button and investigating specific cases. So this is a very interesting part of the application, and I would like to draw your attention before investigating a specific case to the AI setup menu, which is one of the core modules of Fectfinder and provides the option to turn on AI improved enhancement for business rules. So these AI tools, including anomaly detection or network analysis, decision trees, are aimed at uncovering inconsistent or unusual patterns or hidden relationships between customers. And so these settings can be adjusted once turned on and will be incorporated into the process automatically. Once this is done, I can go to my case handling menu and investigate a specific case. So let's have a look at case number 35 as an example. First, I'll get a general overview, a transaction overview that shows me, for example, the debit or credit flow of a particular customer related to this case. I'll also get an overview of the kind of transactions that this particular customer is leaning towards. So in this case, we have increased cash transactions, and we can also look at the global transaction flow or the global footprint of this particular customer. I can investigate details related to the specific customers. And then if I were interested in what triggered this specific alert related to a business rule or AI in this case, which is described here as a network analysis that was used to identify relationships between customers related to the risk of money laundering, I'd be able to explore this network analysis by dragging and on the different edges of the network and exploring how my customer, in this case related to transport, is in connection with other customers and what kind of transactions are being exchanged between those customers. So for example, whether it's a debit or a credit transaction. So this is a very powerful example of how hidden relationships between customers can be illustrated and detected. Based on such an example, or based on such an investigation, this case can be either taken to the next step and further investigated for fraud or not. So here in this assessment menu option, the case can be either marked as no fraud or it can be escalated into the next step for further investigation. So last but not least, we have the administration and government menu, which allows for grouping or setting certain parameters, for example, adding high-risk countries, adding industries or specific labels in order to keep track on what has been done and to produce specific grouping parameters. The log function allows for continuous monitoring of whatever has been done, which is a very important part of the governance function of the application. So whatever has been done is being recorded in the backlog and can always be used for auditing internally or externally. So I hope I was able to show how the interaction of business rule and AI can lead to an improvement of FEC efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed the demo. So let's finish this webinar with a recap. So on the previous slide, I talked about the challenges that financial institutions face with implementing their transaction monitoring. But let's also see how Fectfinder will help you overcome those challenges. So the first set of challenges are related to resources. So transaction monitoring resources, and more generically KYC experts, are scarcer every day. And it has to do largely with stricter regulatory demands. Additionally, what I also mentioned, primarily the rule-based systems are notorious for producing many alerts, and the majority of those, obviously, sometimes up to 99% being a false positive. So what Fectfinder will help you with, because of the integration of case handling and AI, is that with every investigation, you'll become more effective. So that's one of the great parts about it, because every customer will be labeled, and it will help you find customers that are perhaps like that one that's suspicious. So that's a really strong feature of the system. The MI is there to give you a helicopter view of your end-to-end transaction monitoring process, and will also show you where your bottlenecks are. Because of the nature and the integration and automation that's being made available by Fectfinder, you will reduce overhead, meaning you will rely less on technical colleagues. So when it comes to the nature of Fect, as mentioned, often it goes undetected, and quite often your financial institution, as a financial institution, you will only see a fraction of the entire scheme. That will probably cross borders and continents. Criminals change their strategy continuously to stay ahead. So the needle in a haystack problem, as mentioned. So Fectfinder will help you overcome those because, first of all the experience is stored in the system. It's just one big repository where your cases are stored, all your customer information. So nothing is lost. The supervised machine learning AI that's in the system will help you enhance your implemented rules to become more specific and better target the real suspicious customers and therefore reduce false positives. The unsupervised machine learning will help you detect the unknowns, all that in just one big suite. Your existing data, you can actually easily, because of the structure of the environment, you can easily add open data to give you better insights of your customers and the transactions and alerts associated to that customer. So when it comes to compliance, there's always the stress of it, obviously, but also the extra work that's related to it because of the questions and you need to collect your evidence and all that stuff. And that can be really a big burden. So again, because of the integration and because Fectfinder keeps track of every change modification in the system, that just becomes really easy. Just pressing a button and showing a report. Also very important is that mandatory processes such as remediation and backtesting are becoming business as usual. Because of the flexibility of the system, and you can just easily reconfigure a control, you can do below the line testing. So all those things won't be separate processes anymore. It will just be part of your daily operations. The last point talks about progress. So progress of the investigations part. So alerts being investigated in time, and are you preventing from backlogs to occur, which is obviously very important. When it comes to fragmented processes, I guess some of the problems that come with that is the long implementation time. For instance, of new rules, new thresholds, new technology. So also another problem is having multiple systems and not being integrated. You have a lack of feedback and learning, right? So between those systems and the users of those systems. There's a lack of an end-to-end view of the process, and all data is just stored in silos. While combined, they are probably more useful. So within Fectfinder, you can prototype and calibrate before you can operationalize. So no need for a business analyst, a product owner, and an IT department. As an end user, as a Fec expert, you can actually test your hypotheses in the system, translating risk topologies into rules, and actually start testing together with your investigations team. So the whole process from end to end, from the risk assessment, as articulated by the DMB, to generating alerts and case management, it's just all in one system, and that's where it should be. And finally, Fectfinder as a modular system is really capable via its API to connect local systems and AI. So for instance, if you have a really nice local AI initiative, start using the case handling module of Fectfinder. So you can actually operationalize your algorithms and even get feedback from the investigations teams, which is obviously very, very useful. When it comes to volumes, data, again, it can be, it's an opportunity, but it can also be a challenge, depending obviously on your system technology or what's at the core of your system. Many tunables can be associated with rules, many tunable parameters, I mean by that. So within Fectfinder, because it's really built on top of a highly scalable and available big data cluster, it doesn't really matter how much data you have. Fectfinder is always very much capable to produce it and to make it useful. Also because of the technology, it's really agnostic on where you want to install it. So depending on your own policies or what's being prescribed by your regulator, you can install it and run it on-prem, cloud, any kind of cloud provider, or even hybrid. So whatever suits your needs. So that was actually our demo and a webinar. I want to thank you all for attending. I hope you found it inspiring and you will see the potential of Fectfinder. If you want to have more information about the tool or a longer demo, then we're really happy to give that, to show you the tool even in more detail. So get in touch with my partner Marcel or myself. You can find our information here, and we would love to get in touch with you. Thanks again for attending, and hopefully till the next time.